Okay, hopefully everyone has seen my bio by now. And we'll be discussing historic houses of Louisville today. Louisville has always been a great place in which to live, and hopefully everyone here agrees with that. And all. Make sure I got everything squared up here first before I begin. There we go. And yeah, here's a number of the news clippings that talk about Louisville being rated one of the best places in which to live. So if you're going to live here, hopefully we'll live in a nice house. And so there's a lot of historic homes in Louisville. Here are a number of them that are museum-type homes. These homes are open to the public for the most part, that you can actually go and visit. And I'll be discussing a lot of these in my presentation. We also have what I call legacy houses, houses that define where a neighborhood might be. And again, I'll be discussing some of these later in my program. And then a lot of historic homes have been turned into bed and breakfast or Airbnbs, where people can rent them and live a couple of days within them. And I will also be discussing a few of these also in my program. But let's go at the very beginning. Who lived here first? The indigenous people. And where did they live? Or what did they live in? Mostly we had what was called the Shawnee tribes in this district, although we also had some Iroquois and Cherokee and others that passed through this region. But Shawnee primarily. And per one of my history friends, she sent me this description here of the type of villages that they lived in while they were in this region. Most of them lived in what was called, they were constructed of poles, wood poles, with reeds or small branches and filled in with clay, grass roots, and all that. So here is an image up here of a Native American tribe and the type of homes they would have lived in many years ago. And then when the Europeans came to this region, they settled into fort-like compounds known as stations. And they were mainly log constructed, wood constructed, but they were in a fort-like compound, so for protection in the early part of in the mid-1700s, late 1700s. And George Rogers Clark, who founded Louisville, he lived in a log cabin on the Indiana side of the river, or across the river from Louisville, in what we now call Clarksville, Indiana. And a number of years ago, they built a replica of his cabin over there in Clarksville. It overlooked the Ohio River. And this was an original cabin, but wasn't George Rogers Clark cabin. They brought this cabin down somewhere else, but it was of the same period when George Rogers Clark built his cabin. And you can see some reenactors here showing how they would have lived within that cabin. Unfortunately, a few years ago, an arsonist set this cabin on fire and burned it down back in 2021. And they are going to replace it at some point. But again, a log cabin when early settlers came here. But most of the houses that remain from the early part of when Louisville was settled were masonry, were brick or stone construction. A good example of that is the Paget house, which is located down on River Road near Frankfort Avenue area. In the upper left-hand corner is what it once looked like, and then here's a more recent photograph of it after they restored it a year or so ago. And Margaret Wright Paget was a descendant of George Washington, our first president. She was his great-great-niece. And so she lived here in Louisville and lived here in the Paget house, which was built in the 1790s. We don't have an exact date as to when the Paget house was built, but we're thinking early 1790s, 1791-92 period when that house was built. Again, it's brick, so it's survived all the flooding and fires and things that have occurred there over the years. There were a lot of the homes back then were wood built, wood framed, like this Squire Eric house, which still exists in the Portland neighborhood. It was built in 1815, but most of the log or wood-framed homes no longer exist for obvious reasons. They either burned down or deteriorated in some point of time. Masonry homes were the longest to live, and we'll discuss a lot of those today. Speaking of which, here's the Howard Hardy House. It's down on 2nd Street between Chestnut and Liberty. And it's known as the Howard Hardy House, built in 1830. Some of you may remember it as Miller's Cafeteria. There's a restaurant. And a number of years ago, they decided to remove the Miller's addition there and restore it back to the appearance of what it looked like back in the 1830s. I think it is a bed and breakfast, not bed and breakfast, but an Airbnb now. I believe that's what they use it for. Some of the most prominent masonry homes that still exist in our community are these four here. And these were all neighbors to one another. There weren't really any houses in between. So you had Locust Grove, where the Crons lived, and they were neighbors to the Taylors, the Zachary Taylor family. And then they were neighbors to the Anderson family, who lived in Soldier's Retreat, and they were neighbors to the Funk family that lived in that house there. So I'll discuss each one of these. So Locust Grove, one of our most legendary historic homes here in the community, built in 1790. It was the home of William and Lucy Cron. Lucy was the sister to George Rogers Clark, who founded Louisville back in 1778, 1780 period. And it still exists today. It's a museum home. You can actually go and tour it and go through it. Here are some images of the interior of it. I wish I had put up about 40, 50, 60 years ago, this house was almost ready to fall down. It was in very poor condition, but fortunately the city of Louisville purchased it and restored it, and it looks like this today. It's in great shape. Beautiful home. We got a painting of old George hanging there in the hallway. And again, Locust Grove was neighbors to the Taylor House, which is just off of Blank and Baker Lane, just up the road from Locust Grove, not very far away from that. So this is called the Taylor House. Actually, this was Zachary Taylor's father who built this home. And it actually originally was just half the size that you see here. They added on to it later on, but it was really originally just about half the size as you see it there. And in the April 3rd, 1974 tornado, it almost got blown down. But again, it being masonry, it withstood that tornado. It damaged the roof, but it has since been beautifully restored. Here are some interior photographs of it. I don't think it looked like this when old Zach lived there. Although Zach really didn't live here very much. He was out on his military campaigns most of the time. His wife Margaret, though, lived here and bore several of their children in this house. Not too far away, down the Hurstburn Parkway, you've got Soldier's Retreat. It was the Anderson household, built in 1793 by Richard Anderson. He was in the Revolutionary War, as was George Rogers Clark. But it probably is most famous for being the home of Robert Anderson. He was the son of Richard Anderson, and Robert Anderson was the commandant for the Union Army at Fort Sumter in South Carolina when the Confederates attacked. And this is Anderson's gravesite up at West Point in New York State. This is some of the interior of Soldier's Retreat. Now, Soldier's Retreat has had numerous renovations over the years. It was in very deteriorated condition. It was actually damaged during the earthquake of 1812. It had fires. It's had all sorts of mishaps that went on with this house. But fortunately, Leroy Highball, I think was his name, Leroy Highball Jr., restored this house back in the 1970s and 1980s. And so beautiful on the interior, as you can tell. And in the basement of this house, the current owner has put a museum down in the basement to honor the Anderson family. That talks about Richard Anderson, who was in the Revolutionary War. He's in the upper left-hand corner, and talks about Robert Anderson and all. So very neat little museum. How many other people have museums in your basement talking about your house history? It has even a little light show that goes along with this. So it's very nicely done, a little private museum honoring the Anderson family there at Soldiers Retreat.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, go right ahead.
Why is it called Soldiers Retreat?
Because Richard Anderson was in the Revolutionary War. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary War.
And he went to that?
He built that house.
Okay.
So yes, he lived there. It was called Soldiers Retreat. And of course his son was a very famous Union Army soldier. This is the Bullitt Estate off of Shelbyville Road. We now know it as Oxmoor. This is a map from 1858 that shows where Oxmoor was located. There off Shelbyville Turnpike. Is actually called the Louisville and Lexington Turnpike back in those days. But here is what we now know it as Oxmoor House, but it was built by the Bullitt family. Very historic, and it still exists. This is a little genealogy of the Bullitt family. So Alexander Scott Bullitt built Oxmoor. He was married twice, once to Priscilla, who passed away, and then he married one of the Churchill family members, married Churchill Prather, and they had several children, all very distinguished and honorable family. This is Oxmoor as it looks today. It's a beautiful house. It's been added on to numerous times, been a lot of renovations to it. Have very beautiful gardens. Has this beautiful library. It's the largest private library in Kentucky. I think it has over 10,000 volumes there in the library. Another one of our most famous homes is Farmington off of Bardstown Road near the Waterson Expressway. Probably its most noted visitor was Abraham Lincoln back in 1841 when he visited his friend Joshua Fry Speed back then, and Fanny Speed. Now then, a lot of folks believe or have heard that Farmington was designed by Thomas Jefferson. Well, per the records of Farmington, they believe the designer was a guy by the name of Paul Skidmore, but that he was influenced by Thomas Jefferson, because here are 3 homes that Jefferson did design, and they were all, as you can tell, very similar to Farmington, with the portico, with the gabled roof there, and the symmetry, octagonal rooms. Farmington has 2 octagonal plan rooms there, as does this Farmington in Charlottesville. So anyways, very famous house, Farmington. Now this is the 1858 map, what we call the 1858 Bergman map. And every little dot and little note that you see there represents a house. I'm not exactly sure how Bergman did this map. Did he go to all of these, or did he have assistants that helped him? I don't know the whole story there, but there literally are hundreds, maybe thousands of houses on this 1858 map, which shows where everyone lived and all. You can actually go on the Library of Congress.gov website and look at this map and zoom into it. It's very detailed with the roads and other geographic features on it to see where you might have lived at and who owned your property back in 1858. It's a very detailed map. So for what it's worth, a lot of these houses still exist. They're surrounded by neighborhoods, just like the Long home, which is across the street here, across Bardstown Road in the Glenmary subdivision. Many of those old farmhouses still exist surrounded by neighborhoods. In my neighborhood, I live in Reedlawn neighborhood, and we have Salima Hall there in our neighborhood, and it was built in the 1830s. So a lot of these homes still exist. Here are a few of those. The Funk houses at Taylorsville Road and Hurstburg Parkway. So the patriarch of the Funk family was John Funk. He built his house in 1795, and he owned a big farm right in this intersection area there. And then he built homes for his kids, James Funk in 1865, and his daughter Harriet when she got married in 1855. It's now called Nun Leah, that house there at Hurstburn and Taylorsville Road. Unfortunately, and by the way, the John Peter Funk house no longer looks like this. It actually was built very similar to Locust Grove and Soldier's Retreat, this house was, but in the last 20 years, the current owner sort of modified it, and it now looks like that. Yeah, kind of took the history out of it, didn't they? They took a masonry house, and they put a stone facade on it, and this entryway area there, yeah, it's kind of a shame that they took a very nice historic home and modified it like that. Now then, the Hikes family, you may have heard of Hikes Lane there in the Bardstown Road and Taylorsville Road areas. They owned a big farm in that location, and there were 5 Hikes homes all the way from Taylorsville Road down to Furman Boulevard, over across the way of Hikes Lane, and then the one that I have started there, I'll discuss that Hikes home. Some of you may have had dinner at one of the Hikes houses. If you've ever been to Johnny's restaurant or Bill Boland's restaurant,
Yeah.
that was the Hikes home there. Unfortunately, a few years ago, they demolished the Hikes family home, and unbeknownst to us historians, we did not realize that it was a log home. And so one day we get a call out of the blue saying, hey, they're tearing down a log house out on Bardstown Road, and we went out there, and yeah, once they took off all the siding and started to demolish it, we realized it was a log home, the Hikes house was. Pretty sad. The High Gold House, which is in the sort of the Clifton neighborhood, Butchertown area of Louisville. Here, pointed out, there it is right there. This is River Road here, this is Frankfort Avenue. The new Botanical Gardens is just over here to the left. And there's the High Gold facade looking down on it. And that's what the house actually looked like before we say the facade to it. It was built by Christian Heigold, and he was a German immigrant. He was very patriotic to the United States. And back in the mid-1850s, there was a lot of anti-immigrant fervor out there, in which Native Americans did not like immigrants coming in. And we'll let the cell phone get turned off here. We can get to that. Sorry. Okay. Anyone else have cell phones on if you want to turn those off? But anyways, back in the 1850s, there was a lot of anti-immigrant fervor in the United States, and so Christian Heigold, being a German immigrant, he wanted to demonstrate that he was a good, patriotic American, and so he put a lot of patriotic symbols on the facade of his home here. Thank goodness, after 170 some odd years, we no longer have anti-immigrant feelings going on in the country today.
Yeah.
But I'll show you exactly where High Gold House was. It was in what was called the Point neighborhood, and this is the old Point neighborhood streetscape. The Point neighborhood has since been wiped out due to flooding and other issues. So it was on Marion Street right there where the red star is. And then I put these colored lines here to represent the streets, Frankfort Avenue, and the other is, Adams Street. And so the Heidelberg House would have been right here where the Botanical Gardens is today. Shows you sort of where that was.
We moved from Frankfurt on Stowe Avenue.
Okay.
You know where Stowe is?
Yes, yes.
We lived on Stowe in Arlington.
Okay. And so yeah, and they moved the facade as well. So as you can see, they picked the facade up and they moved it there in the middle of Frankfurt Avenue.
Yeah.
And a number of years ago, I put together this little graphic that illustrates all of the patriotic themes that Christian Heigold placed on his facade of his house. He had a bust of George Washington, one of that president, James Buchanan, the 13 stars that represented the original 13 states. Had a lot of patriotic symbolism on that facade, and that's the reason why it was saved.
So did that work for him? Was
Yes.
he more accepted?
Yeah, he actually, what we know of him, he built the steps to the Jefferson County Courthouse. He built those steps leading up to it, those big stone steps, we were aware of that. But yeah, he had a very successful career here in Louisville. The village of Anchorage has a historic home. It's called the Gosley House. There's a little rendering of it right there. It was called the Anchorage, and the reason why the neighborhood is called Anchorage is because of the Gosley home, James Gosley. And there's the house as it stands today. We believe it was patterned on the design by Andrew Jackson Downing. Downing was an architect, and he put out what was called a pattern book, and in this pattern book had a lot of just renderings and floor plans of homes that people around the country could buy this book and build homes from. And so as you can tell, the types of homes that Downing designed were very similar to what Anchorage Place turned out to be. Because when people lived way out in the country, they didn't have access to an architect or a designer, so they bought a pattern book and they went to the local builder and said, hey, I like this one on page 50, can you build that for me? And voila, you get a house this very well designed. So Andrew Jackson Downing, very well known architect back in his day. And here are several other homes that we think that Downing's pattern book was built upon. The Hurstburn Country Club and what's known as the Woodhaven Bed and Breakfast off of Browns Lane was also a Downing house, we believe. These are some other pictures of Anchorage Place prior to its restoration. As you can tell, it had some poorly designed additions to it, if I could say that. And here's what it looks like today. See how well they restored it back to its former glory. Here are some interior photographs of it, which I think have been a little bit updated. I don't think Gosley lived in something like this back in the 1860s and 1870s when he built it. But very beautiful. This is the Fair House, F-E-H-R. Anyone familiar with Fair beer?
Oh, yeah.
Now, I should have included a copy of the beer, an image of the beer here, but this was Frank Fair's home on Lexington Road. Pretty significant house. Look at the interior of this. Very well crafted. It was designed by John Bacon Hutchings. He was a noted architect, built beautiful homes in the Cherokee Triangle Highlands area of Louisville. Look at that fireplace.
Oh, I know.
I would even hate to start a fire into that fireplace. It's so nice looking. Some more interior photos of it. Look at this staircase. Now, one thing I always do when I go in historic homes is I look at the staircases because that helps me identify who the architect might be. If they design such an ornate looking staircase, that means that an architect of distinguished capabilities designed that. So obviously John Bacon Hutchings would have designed that newel post the way it's represented there. But here's another good example. This is the Wilson House in Old Louisville. It was designed by Clark and Loomis architects, and just look at the wood craftsmanship of this. And all of the Clark and Loomis homes, if you go inside them, have similar well-designed wood-crafted staircases and newel posts. Here's another example. This is at the Conrad Caldwell house in Old Louisville. Again, another well-crafted wood staircase.
Beautiful.
And there's the Conrad Caldwell house. Conrad, Theophilus Conrad, he was in the leather tanning business due to Louisville's livestock here locally. He was able to get the hides from pigs and horses or cows and things like that, and make boots and belts and things of that nature. And then the Caldwell family later on bought it from the Conrads, and the Caldwells were in the water tank business. They built big water tanks. They also built the Louisville Slugger bat in front of it down on West Main Street. Look at this drawing here. This is by the Clark and Loomis architectural firm. What's interesting is to build this house, which is very ornate, they only had like 6 sheets of drawings to implement this house. Nowadays, an architectural firm would do like 30, 40 sheets of drawings to implement a home of this detail, or maybe even more. But back then, Clark and Loomis had the craftsmen, the masons, the wood carvers, people like that could just take a hint of what the architect wanted to do and create a beautiful design out of it, as you can tell there. Here are some interior photographs. A sister house of the Conrad Caldwell house is known as the Auerbacher Clement House. This is what it looked like about 10, 15 years ago, and it subsequently has been restored. It now contains residential units, apartments within it, but again, it was the front facade of it was designed by the Clark and Loomis firm back in the 1890s. Here's Clark and Loomis. Some of the buildings that they designed. If anyone's ever been down to the old spaghetti factory there in the center, that was known as the Levy Brothers building at one point. If you've ever been down to the Science Center, the old Carter Dry Goods building, another Clark and Loomis. First and Chestnut, the old medical school in the upper left-hand corner. You have the old DuPont manual there on the far left. St. Peter's German church there next to it. Carnegie Library over in New Albany. The Speed Art Museum. And then this is the old St. Paul's church down at Brook and Broadway. So they've designed not only these, but beautiful buildings throughout Louisville, as well as all these phenomenal homes. So Clark and Loomis was a very active architectural firm that designed some beautiful buildings throughout the area here, both in Louisville and across the river in southern Indiana. The Culberson Mansion, this is over in New Albany. It was built by the Baines brothers. I think it was B-A-N-E-S, Baines brothers. They built this very beautiful French chateau, or whatever you want to call it, Queen Anne type of a structure. Don't exactly remember the Victorian name for this style, but very grand mansion. This is the back portion of that. By the way, a lot of these homes were entered from the back side of the house, not the front. The front usually was just the impressive view, but the horse carriages actually would go around to the back and offload the passengers on the back side, and they were in off that side. Such as the Zachary Taylor house would be one like that, the Locust Grove, any of these historic homes, because they did not want people coming in with muddy boots in through their front foyer area. They would have them come around to the rear through the utilitarian area to wipe off their boots to come inside. Here's the interior of the Culberson Mansion. Just a spectacular historic home over in New Albany.
Yes, it is.
Look at this stairwell here. Okay, I would just get me dizzy just trying to paint that.
Right?
Okay, here's a very famous home, historic home. There you go. I was going to give you a little clue by saying Grand Avenue, but someone's already guessed it. Yes, Muhammad Ali. That was his home there after it's been restored. Very famous. It was open for public tours, but I believe it's been closed now, and I'm not certain what the status of it is currently. But I am so glad they took it from this to that. Just phenomenal. Last but not least, let's talk about the little loom house up off Kenwood Hill, off near Iroquois Park, where the Hill Sisters created their famous song, Happy Birthday to You. As some of you may know, they wrote a lot of kindergarten songs. One of them was called Morning to You, in which they adapted to Happy Birthday to You. And it wasn't actually sung at the Little Loom House, it was sung at what was called the Wisteria Cabin, which was just up the hill from the Little Loom House there. But here's a little bit more about it. It was copyrighted, and then in 2015 it was uncopyrighted, which meant that you could sing the song at a restaurant without fear of being sued by whoever owned the copyright. By the way, does anyone have a birthday here or birthday this week? No birthdays? Oh, well, I was going to sing happy birthday. By the way, I was just in Hawaii not too long ago, and they sung it in Hawaiian, and whatever that is. They sung it, and that's what they said they were singing it. And then I was in Italy a number of years ago, and they sang it in Italian in the table next to me. So I think it's by the Songwriters Hall of Fame, it's the most sung song in the world. And everyone sings it at least on a daily basis throughout the world. So that's the Happy Birthday House worldwide. And thanks for attending, and there's some of the
Thank you.
thanks. Thank you very much. Good deal. We got any questions on that?